Welcome to Everything CPA and Private Equity, where we unpack the evolving relationship between accounting firms, private equity, and other strategics. I'm David Wolfskehl, a partner at Whitman Transition Advisors.
And I'm Phil Whitman, CEO of Whitman Transition Advisors. And we've chatted with more than 150 private equity groups. We've actually closed over 40 transactions with those private equity groups. And we're bringing you firsthand insights from the front lines.
And whether you're exploring your first deal, putting your toe in the water, refining your strategy, we're here to guide you with real stories, expert advice, actionable takeaways. Let's dive in. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Everything CPA and Private Equity, where today we're not going to talk about private equity, but we are going to really talk about another important topic. If you're a leader of a CPA firm and you're looking at succession and the options for your firm, we have kind of die at your desk. Not sure that's my favorite option, but certainly is an option out there. We have merging into a larger firm. With all the new private equity and strategics, that certainly has built huge momentum. But, BDO and Grossi recently, KSM before that, they decided to work on ESOP, and that's another solution. And at Whitman Transition Advisors, we want to educate you so that you can make the best decisions for you and your firm, your community, and all those stakeholders that you care about. So today we have Cristine O'Keefe of the Impact Strategic Funding team on. She can help raise that money for the ESOP. And then we have Tabitha Croscut of Divine Milliment, an attorney who has a regional practice, but really a national ESOP practice. So very, very excited to have both of you on today. Appreciate your time. We know with BDO occurring, with Grossi occurring, things are moving in that direction. And it's clearly another alternative. And I think for all these firms, there's different solutions for what they want to accomplish. So Chris, why don't you start a little bit and talk a little bit about what makes a firm the right type of firm for ESOPs, because I'm assuming it's not the person who still likes to yell at his employees, complain about the employees, and look at them as costs. So why don't you share a little bit about that attitude that makes a good firm, ESOP, potentially ready?
Sure. I think the culture, we always talk about culture in M&A work, right? But the starting culture has to be one that is very employee centered, and the seller themselves, if it's more than one in a firm setting, I'm not sure, but they have to be interested in what's happening next with the firm, with the people. They want to see that what they've built and the things that they have put in place will have some continuity, and that needs to be very important to them, because they may have to decide, do we want top dollar or do we want continuity? And so they have to really kind of think through what their values are in their exit and what they want to leave behind. I think that's really important.
And I think it does start with leadership and thinking about what they want, because is an ESOP the easiest thing to do? Right? Not the easiest. Now, we do work with KSM, who's probably been an ESOP for 15, 20 years in the CPA marketplace. And they would say the results, and I'm sure they had the barriers back 15 years ago or whenever they did it, but the results for them and their firm has been spectacular. So Tabitha, why don't you talk a little bit about why it's hard to do? And then to start with, not to be negative, because we're here to educate you, but, this is more of a process than calling a PE firm, getting an LOI and negotiating. So Tabitha, why don't you offer some insights?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the hard part about ESOPs is a couple of things. It's certainly in the complexity of the transaction. There is a structure around ESOPs and how we complete an ESOP transaction, but it is all very federal Internal Revenue Code based in terms of the rules and regulations around it. So there's a little bit more in terms of we've got to follow the rules in order to do a good deal for an ESOP-owned company. That, I think, adds a layer that you don't have in a sort of standard, I'll call it third-party sale transaction, whether that's to PE or strategic or whatever it is, right? But there are sort of unwritten rules, but there's not, you don't have to go to the Internal Revenue Code and make sure that you've checked off sections 1042 and 409 and all of that. So there's a little bit more of a focus on have we checked off all the right boxes, so that there are some complexity around the transaction itself. I think we also have to sort of counterbalance that with the fact that an ESOP is a qualified retirement plan, right? So there is something that the company is creating, very similar to the creation and adoption of a 401k plan. And we're just using that qualified retirement plan, we call an ESOP, to purchase the stock of the owner or owners. And so some of the complexity is not necessarily in the transaction, but there's also those hurdles around figuring out what does the owner or owners want, right? And so that's very similar to a third-party sale transaction in that it's really important for the owner to know. And my first question is always sort of, what are we trying to do here, right? Like, why are we talking about ESOP? We're really about the sustainability of successful ESOP structures for our companies. We have some owners who are very focused on tax, right? And the tax savings that align with an ESOP. We have some owners that are all about culture. I want an employee-owned ownership culture. The mix is great. We have others who it's about legacy. It's about, I don't really want to sell my company and then not be able to see my name on the door in 5 years. And so the ESOP gives people that opportunity to ensure there will be a legacy for their company. But yeah, the hard part is really similar to what you see in third-party transactions, in the mindset of the owner. Getting through that, getting to understand what are we trying to accomplish is really, really important. I say to my owners, I need two things. I need to know what you have to have in this transaction. It's very important to me, right? What do we have to have? Do we need cash at close? Do we need to get paid out? You need to be paid out over less than 15 years. These things are really important to you. What do we need to do? We need to keep your son on the payroll. I've had that one come up. So, what do we really have to have in this transaction? And what do you want? Right? Like, if I can get it in there, like what would be great for you? And I won't promise you that an ESOP can get you all of those things, but if I can't deliver for you the have to haves, then we move on to a different transaction. Right. And so you'll see it's not unusual in the ESOP space for ESOPs to be, I like them to be plan A, but a lot of times they're plan B. If we can't go to market and get the right deal, or we're not comfortable with the third party market approach, well, the ESOP is a great plan B for a lot of companies. And at the end of the day, not the right deal for everybody. So,
and one of the things that we see, and we say all the time, that, probably 50% or less of CPA firms as they're run today are PE eligible. Right. And PE eligible, not so much from a size, because we're seeing PE going down all the way to $1.5, $1.8 million of revenue, but PE eligible from a profitability point of view. And so there's a vast amount of firms that might not have that clear plan. So let's talk, Tabitha, a little bit about BDO and Grassi. So at BDO, lots and lots of partners, lots of stakeholders. At Grassi, I think we had more of a significant stakeholder, right? Significant leader, so much different. Share a little bit about how those different stakeholders and how that works for the larger company versus a more concentrated ownership company.
Yeah, I think that, what that points out, David, I think is that you can have ownership structures that are very different and yet still feasible for an ESOP transaction. I think that's really the focus of that. And what's also similar and yet different in some ways between those two companies is they are not 100% ESOP owned, right? And so in the sort of market outside of those transactions, we would actually see more 100% ESOP owned companies, that is, owners selling 100% of their stock to an ESOP, whereas the BDO and the Grassi transaction, that's not 100% ESOP ownership transition. They're taking steps towards that, but they didn't out of the gate sell 100% to the ESOP. And really what that points out that is really important in the ESOP space is that you don't have to sell 100%. And that's different from some of the third-party transactions, right? And so we have companies that transition, 10%, 30%, 49, 51, 75%. It's sort of one of the really great features of ESOP is the flexible nature of how we set them up, but also the percentage of ownership being transitioned, right? And so there is that possibility for some companies that do a 30% sale of stock to an ESOP to later go to the market And now when you participate in that market process, your employees are participating with you, right? So they're going to get that. If you sold 30%, they're going to get 30% of that value when you sell to that PE firm. It's possible, right? I want to make that clear. Like our ESOP companies can be sold just like every other company. It's a really great thing.
So why don't you reinforce that? So once you're an ESOP, that doesn't mean you're an ESOP forever. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. It doesn't need to mean that. I have some companies that want to be ESOP forever, but yeah, that's correct.
And then Chris, I talked earlier about probably only 50% of firms are PE eligible, right? And many of the larger firms have already made their decisions, whether they're going to do an ESOP like BDO and Grassi, whether they're going to take private equity money. So why don't you talk about smaller size firms and who might be eligible to do an ESOP and what size you need to be, or what size you might need to be?
It seems to me that it usually comes down to EBITDA and employee size are kind of the key factors. I know firms don't always think in terms of EBITDA, but that's the beauty of the private equity world kind of moving in, transitioning how they look at their financials and how they make distributions and all that kind of stuff is going to be a part of preparing to even have the conversation, because you have to know what the true value of the business is. And a lot of times typically that's based on EBITDA. So that's one thing. A smaller firm may not have looked at their firm that way. As far as
a smaller firm has not looked at their firm that way. In fact, I think one of the biggest episodes we had was just explaining what EBITDA was. How do you do it? How do they come up with that number? So that is still something that is unclear to many firms.
Right. And you want to be large enough so that going through the complexity of the transaction, the cost of the transaction, the maintenance of the transaction, all of those things make sense financially for the firm as well. So those are important considerations. And if they really hadn't considered an ESOP and were looking, in the traditional way at how someone would exit a firm that size in the smaller world, they're going to have to really get some education around it and open their minds a little bit, I think.
So let's, look, there's things you need to do an ESOP. It's highly regulated. There's rules and regulations, right? So I think we've clearly stated, not the specifics, but there are things you need to do. But let's also focus 2 years after the transaction, right? What's some of the benefits? Because if you're not excited about it, you're not going to take those bumps in the road to get there. Companies that care about culture, company that might care about legacy, but what are some of the other benefits for a firm who's gone through the ESOP process? We take BDO 2 years from now or 3 years from now. What are those partners saying that they like about it? What's been the impact on the firm? Any thoughts there?
Tabitha, I'll let you field that one.
All right. Hopefully there's a lot of things that will be a great future, looking back, why I did this, why it's such a good thing. Clearly, there are some really nice tax advantages, whether that's the Section 1042 tax deferral that the selling shareholders get from the transaction, whether that's the fact that the company is 100% tax on a federal level, at least because they're 100% ESOP owned, right? Like that's a big one, and you save a lot of money. And now I can take that additional cash that I would have sent to the Treasury, and I can go acquire other companies with it, right? Like that's a pretty huge thing. But I think the other side of it is, again, going back to the retirement plan side of ESOPs, and that is, your employees can look at their accounts and see that they have something that many other employees and other companies don't have. And that is, they have an interest in the stock of the company they work for. They are not working just for the executives in the company or the owners, the investors of the company. They're working for themselves. They're building value in the accounting firm for their future retirement savings. And yeah, it's a long, outset. You're not getting cash, in hand every year. But as you continue to see the shares in your account grow, it does enhance the culture, right? If you do it right, if you communicate the values, and in an accounting firm, it's like, I would think a little bit easier than our manufacturing companies where, the accountants know what value is. They know what this number means, whereas our manufacturers have no idea what stock is. So, I think there's a great opportunity for accounting firms to really establish, an opportunity for their employees to take a greater interest in the jobs they work in every day.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that too. I mean, we talk all the time about talent being a problem and retention being a problem. But imagine, if you start as a young person in a firm and you have some stock advantage that, you're watching grow and grow and grow. It seems like that is only good for the firm to have that kind of an incentive to stay in one place and to grow and stay.
Yep. People, I'm a big believer that when people have ownership, they act differently. A renter versus an owner of a house acts differently. So totally get that. So Tabitha, let's talk a little bit about the advantages for the seller. So I'm thinking about selling 100% or a piece of the firm. Talk more about that 1042 and how that helps make that transaction more valuable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. From a high level, Section 1042 basically allows an owner, primarily in a C corporation context, but we're getting there in the S corporation world, but allows you to sell at least 30% of your stock to an ESOP. And then if you take the proceeds from that sale and you invest them in basically U.S. company stocks and bonds, you don't pay capital gains. So as long as you hold those new investments, kind of like a 1031 in the real estate world, but now we're talking about private company stock that you're investing in. As long as you hold that, potentially, you hold that until death. And right now, based on the tax code, you get a step up in basis and you never actually pay capital gains on the sale of your stock. It could be a huge opportunity for many owners. It's intriguing, at least, and we explore it to see if it makes sense. I would say there are fewer owners that take advantage of it than you would expect, but it definitely is very interesting to owners to at least explore it and see if it's the right path.
Right. And when you say stock, so that I can buy AT&T or Netflix, it's not only private company stock?
Yep. It's, any U.S. company stock. There are some limitations. I won't get into the weeds, but there are some limitations on operating company requirements. So there are some restrictions around it, but and there obviously our financial advisory world has come up with some really great tools as well.
And so let's also talk about the stakeholders, because on the P side, what we hear all the time is, what about my junior partners, right? Am I taking something away from them? So for the leader, right, tax exempt, liquidity, maybe gets to keep the name on the door for longer. Let's talk about a junior partner and how are they positively impacted by this type of transaction?
Yeah, absolutely. So on a couple of different fronts, right? So as the junior leader in the company, I would normally be expected to come up with cash to basically buy out the senior partner, right? Well, the ESOP is actually providing you the opportunity to buy that stock, not with your own dollars, but with essentially company dollars on a pre-tax basis. And so there are some substantial tax savings for the firm in general. Also means that junior partner doesn't have to go mortgage their house to buy out senior partner. So that's a great thing. And you've got longevity of the company and hopefully retention value from the ESOP, having everyone in the company participate in the ESOP strategy. Additionally, I would say there's going to hopefully be more cash flow depending on the structure of that transaction, but more cash flow gives you more opportunity to do other things, to incentivize, to perhaps make more money as the junior partner. It still means that you can be a leader, right? So I often talk about that with our professional services firms because, there are oftentimes firms where the juniors are looking to be stockholders in the future, and the ESOP may take that away. It might not. You could do a partial ESOP and still have that opportunity to have a portion of the firm owned by your junior team. So it really depends. There are different structures for different types of companies. We also, in most of our transactions, will include some type of what we call synthetic equity, something like a stock appreciation right, a phantom stock plan, something that is actually more on top of the ESOP allocation for the executive team. We want to make sure that we have that tool available to help incentivize and retain our top really leaders and talent in the company if we need it. Some companies don't need it, but if we do have those strategies and tools to add to the ESOP structure.
And we firmly believe with firms who want to remain independent, and we're okay, whatever you want to do, but increased cash is, the competition has changed. So you can remain independent, but I don't believe that you can remain independent and remain the same as you were yesterday. And I think that increased cash flow, and I think I look at ESOPs as remaining independent in many ways, unlike taking, different than a PE investment or a strategic investment. But cash flow to compete with your new competitors is going to be critical, right? Investing in AI, investing in offshoring, investing in improving your organization is going to be critical. So, Chris, as we start wrapping up, why don't we talk about funding, right? Because I know you help companies find funding for ESOPs. And, if I'm selling to a PE firm, I'm not thinking about funding and those type of things. So why don't you share a little bit about your role and the importance of funding and what that even means in a transaction?
So obviously the seller is looking for some kind of money at the end of the transaction. And that's part of the negotiation is how much cash is he or she expecting. There's some rules of thumb. There's usually a percentage of seller note that's part of the transaction, and some transactions are all seller note. I mean, it really depends on the process. What we do at ISF is, we've made relationships with lenders that are comfortable in the ESOP space, that understand how to structure deals, and that will work with us, with our clients, to make sure that we get the deal that they want. And, that's really our role. It's a specialized lending area. Not every bank, sometimes I think a client or customer is going to want to go to their own bank that they already have a relationship with. And sometimes that bank isn't going to have the appetite to do ESOP lending. So we try to make sure that we know who is doing what and make the right connection for the transaction.
I mean, I think everybody wants to go to their own bank. We see, though, that their own bank oftentimes has much different definitions of what's a good opportunity than the business owner does. So, Tabitha, as we wrap up, any additional points you'd like to share with our audience?
I think the only thing I would add is, there is this speed bump of education around ESOPs. I would say if it sounds interesting, definitely, it's worth the time to explore it before you close the door on it. It's definitely not the transaction for every company, but at least getting a sense for what it is and whether the door should be closed before you walk away from it, I think is really important. So, and if you do walk away from it and, the private equity deal doesn't work out, come back to it, right? Plan B. So it's something that's very flexible and available, and it's at the companies and the owners. They get to control how that ESOP structure is set up. So don't shut the door until you have to, and certainly take the time to see if it's worthy of looking at further. So, and we're always here for additional education and answering any questions. I know Chris and I love to field those. So, always open for answering anybody's question about ESOPs.
Yep. And we look at this as just another avenue. Like I said, to start, I think 50% of firms, even if they all wanted to do a private equity transaction, they just don't have the profitability. For firms that want to remain independent, this might be a way to let leadership have some money and have some liquidity, but remain independent, because the ESOP is really your own team that becomes your partners. And look, we are about providing solutions, right, for our clients. And so if it seems interesting to you, let us know. Tabitha and Chris both would be happy to have a conversation with you, do some quick education with you, and let you identify, hey, this is something I want to pursue, and there might be some hurdles or not the right fit. And for us, we just want to educate you so that you can do what's right for you and your stakeholders, your family. And we want to have good solutions. So Tabitha and Chris, thank you so much for beginning the education process on ESOPs. And if we went back 2 years ago, people didn't know what EBITDA was, and many of them still don't. So we'll have to continue that education. But if you want to remain independent, if you want to cash out some chips, this can be a great solution for you, and some great tax benefits. Like I said, KSM, when I talk to them, they're happy with their decision that was made 15 or 20 years ago. Nobody bigger, or not many bigger than BDO making that decision. There's a few bigger, but not many. And then Agrassi. So If you're thinking about secession, this is another solution for you or something to explore so that you can pick the right thing for you and your families. For Tabitha and Cristine, appreciate your time. For our audience, appreciate you spending a couple minutes with us to continue your education so you can provide that right solution for you, your family, and all your stakeholders. So go crush the day.
Thank you for tuning into Everything CPA and Private Equity. Every episode brings fresh insight. However, there's always more to talk about. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you watch podcasts. Have a question or topic you'd like us to cover? We'd love for you to reach out to us. Together, we will help you navigate this dynamic landscape so that we can help you achieve your goals. Until next time, keep making moves that matter. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.